part 4 of MBA Health Group's webinar mini-series on the Meaningful Use Core Measure requirements. My name is Cody Simpson, and I'm an implementation consultant here at MBA. I know you're busy, so I want to go ahead and get started. Today's webinar will focus on measures 8 and 9, record vital signs and record smoking status. There will be time for questions and answers at the end, so feel free to type your question at any time or wait until the end and we will unmute everyone's lines to answer questions. Meaningful use measure number 8 is record and chart vital signs. The objective of this measure is to collect a patient's height, weight, and blood pressure at each visit and to display their BMI and growth charts. This data must be captured and recorded as structured data in the vital sign area of the EHR. To meet this measure, 50% of all unique patients who are over the age of 2 must have at least one record of their height, weight, and blood pressure entered into the EHR structured data during the reporting period. There is one definition for this measure, unique patient. The concept of unique patient means that if the patient is seen by a provider more than once during the reporting period, then the patient is only counted once in the denominator for the measure. The attestation requirements of this measure include a numerator and a denominator. The numerator for this measure is the number of patients who have at least one entry of their height, weight, and blood pressure recorded as structured data, and the denominator is the number of unique patients aged 2 and older who have been seen by the provider during the reporting period. The resulting percentage must be greater than 50% to meet this measure. A provider may be excluded from this measure if they do not see any patients over the age of 2 or if vital signs do not have any relevance within their scope of practice. So I'll now demonstrate how you could achieve this measure in Enterprise. So from the clinical desktop, as usual, you would select the vital signs icon from the clinical toolbar, which I'm sure all of you know how to do. And in the vital sign panel, you would record patient's height, weight, and blood pressure. So you'll notice on the right-hand side that by entering height and weight, the BMI and BSA are automatically calculated. So this is a great feature as recording changes in the BMI and plotting that information in a growth chart is part of the requirement, yet it doesn't take any additional entries. So you'll notice if the patient's height, weight, and blood pressure have not been recorded, then alerts will appear in the encounter summary. To access the alerts, the user would select the red alert icon in the patient banner, and the encounter summary would then appear, showing the meaningful use alerts at the top of the window. So there are a few key workflow considerations to discuss within your practice with respect to this measure. First, the clinical staff or provider should now be capturing patient vitals at all visits. However, it can be determined by the provider on an individual basis if taking the vitals for a specific visit is necessary. Also, in some cases, the vitals can be entered by the patient through a patient portal and will be counted in the measure. Second, unable to record has been added as a selection for recording vitals and will be counted towards the measure. Third, only the first entry per encounter of height, weight, and blood pressure will be counted toward this measure. So if you take multiple blood pressures, only the first one will count. Fourth, the BMI and growth charts are automatically calculated and thus only need to be reviewed by the provider. And finally, meaningful use alerts will appear in the encounter summary when the vitals have not been recorded in the system. So before we move on to the next measure, I want to highlight what your meaningful use status report will look like if you haven't seen one already. The report contains a list of all meaningful use measures, including the goal for that particular measure and your score. This report is generated by the Stimulus Reporting Portal, which is updated each night based on changes you make in the EHR. It is important to note that the numbering convention on the Stimulus report does not match CMS-defined measure numbers, so keep that in mind when you're attesting. The Stimulus Reporting Portal is only accessible once you implement the stimulus set. So if you'd like more information about stimulus set implementation, please let us know. So moving on, meaningful use core measure number 9 is record smoking status. The objective of this measure is to record smoking status for patients 13 years old or older. To meet this measure, more than 50% of all unique patients seen by the provider in the specified age group must have smoking status recorded as structured data in the EHR. So there's one definition for this measure, unique patient again. The concept of unique patient means that if the patient is seen by a provider more than once during the reporting period, then the patient is only counted once in the denominator for the measure. The attestation requirements of this measure include a numerator and a denominator. The numerator of this measure is the number of unique patients 13 years old or older seen by the provider with smoking status recorded as structured data. The denominator is the total number of unique patients 13 years old or older seen by the provider during the reporting period. The resulting percentage must be greater than 50% to meet this measure, and a provider may be excluded from this measure if no patients 13 years old or older are seen during the reporting period. So instead of providing a demo for this measure, I want to focus on the requirements and how you meet them. A patient must have one of 6 options displayed on the left, recorded as structured data in either active problems or social history. These 6 categories were chosen by CMS because they are considered best practice by the CDC. While there are other smoking and tobacco-related options in the ACI, only the 6 displayed on the left will count toward the numerator of this measure. However, this does not mean you cannot use other tobacco-related options in addition to one of the 6 to document more detail with respect to the patient's smoking status. If a patient's smoking status has not been recorded, a meaningful use alert will appear in the encounter summary. Right-clicking on the alert will display a list of options to resolve the alert. These are the same 6 options I just discussed on the previous slide. So there are 2 key workflow considerations to discuss within your practice with respect to this measure. Smoking status must be recorded for every patient as structured data by making the appropriate selection from the social history or active problem tabs in the ACI. And meaningful use alerts are visible in the encounter summary when smoking status has not been recorded. So I want to thank you very much for your attendance and participation on today's webinar. Our next webinar will be held on Thursday, February 23rd from 12:10 to 12:20, or you can join us for the same session from 3:10 to 3:20 that afternoon. We'll be covering core measures 10 and 11, clinical quality measures, and clinical decision support rule. A recording of today's presentation will be posted on our website, and please do not hesitate to contact us with any questions you may have. So since we're just about at 10 minutes, I would be happy to stay on and answer questions from the audience for the next 5 minutes or so. So please stay on the line if you have questions, and if you need to go, thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next week.